Getting an image that you're excited about can be so rewarding, especially in bird photography. And when you get that edit right, it can take that image to new heights. Now, whether you're a seasoned pro or brand new to editing, everyone's workflow is completely different. So I'm going to take you through my workflow from the raw image to the final product, and hopefully you'll take something away from that. So I've got about 3 images here, so let's just get started. So I'm going to be starting with this image here of a spoonbill that I took in Merritt Island. And we're going to take it from this all the way to this. So first of all, I'm going to crop into this image a little bit because I want to get rid of that grass as much as possible. And I'm also going to rotate it slightly because I want it to be centered and I want the middle of the image to be the head of the spoonbill. So I'm going to use the center overlay crop to make sure I line this up properly and get this as symmetrical as possible. Perfect. Now we have a few blades of grass and another thing that's a little bit distracting at the edges of the frame, but we're going to take that out later. I'm going to concentrate first on making all of the color adjustments and exposure adjustments and things like that. Now, when I took this photo, it was a very foggy morning. As you can see, it's quite hazy. And even though the histogram is quite bright, I'm going to raise the exposure up a little bit, just to about there. And I'm going to drop the highlights down. Now, this is overexposed right now. So even when I add the S-curve in to add some more contrast in, we are going to look like we have an overexposed image. But in my general edits at first, I tend to overexpose my image because I know when I start masking, I'm going to be dropping the exposure of the background and things like that around. So it's kind of getting the balance that I want first, knowing that I'm going to lower the exposure in masking. In terms of exposure, I'm going to drop it down a little bit because it was looking a little warm, and I'm going to keep the tint at around +13 because I kind of want to lean into those magenta tones and sort of pinkish tones with the spoonbill. But first of all, because it was so foggy, I'm going to add some dehaze. And already we're getting so much more detail back. Now, usually I don't go too crazy with the dehaze, but we're in Spoonbill. This is quite an abstract image because we have no real background. So you can get away with going a little bit more. I think between the 20 to 30 section, that is a pretty decent area to be in. I'm always going to enable the lens correction and chromatic aberration. And then in terms of the color mixer, I'm going to try and get a little bit more out of the bird because I just really want to make this stand out in the frame. Usually when I'm working with the color sliders, I kind of go crazy on the saturation just to quickly see which parts of the image I'm going to be changing. Let's do that. Let's leave that not that much. Drop the luminance down a little bit. I see when we try and increase the sky, the spoonbill goes really blue, so we don't want to do that. We're going to leave that for masking. Now already this is a massive difference from the original image to now, but we're going to go into the nitty gritty of editing, which is masking, which is this tab down here. So starting off, I always do this with a lot of my images. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to place a mask around the face of my subject. I'm going to invert it. I'm going to keep it pretty feathered because I don't want this to be too dramatic. And then I'm just going to drop the exposure down ever so slightly. So already we are drawn into the face of the bird because the background is just that little bit darker, but we are nowhere near done with the masking. So next I'm going to create a subject mask to bring a lot of attention back to the spoonbill. Now Lightroom is pretty good at making subject masks, but as you can see if we zoom in here, it is selecting some of the gaps in the sky. And this, sometimes you can get away with leaving this, but if we really want to be pedantic, we can go down here and we can go with a brush, or sometimes you can get away with a color range. Let me see if I do that. So I zoom in, draw a little square there. And as you can see, just drawing a little square around the sky clearance, we've got rid of all of that part of the mask there. So now if we zoom in, it is just on the feathers, which is pretty cool. I think we may have lost a bit of the body. So I'm going to brush that back in because we do want all of the bird to be in. But the fact that we're able to quickly, we don't have to go brushing in between there is pretty awesome. So I'm just going to raise the shadows ever so slightly. Dip the highlights. I'm going to add a little bit of clarity. Now, you don't want to go crazy on the clarity slider, but because we're photographing birds here, we can go between 10 and 20 and get away with it. And I think, let me take the... And we're just gaining that little bit of attention back onto the spoonbill, but we are not done yet. So one thing that I'm noticing when looking at this photo is that the head is getting lost a bit in the body. So I'm going to create an object mask and just roughly highlight over the head and the bill. And let's put the things back on. There we go. That is perfect. So I'm just going to slightly raise the exposure. Bit of contrast. It just gives that little bit extra to the head. Like, it does get lost in the body, but it's just these little mask adjustments are just drawing us in to the head. And when I said that masking is the nitty gritty, I really meant it. So this next one, I'd say 95% of people will not know, but you will know, and you should always make edits that you like. So for me, the coolest thing about a spoonbill are their eyes. So I'm gonna draw an object mask here, and we're gonna put the overlay back on. And here, now this is literally like pixel by pixel, you can see it. I'm just gonna raise the exposure slightly, and then I'm gonna crank the saturation a little bit. Now again, this really is the tiniest of details that not everyone will notice, and you don't have to do this for every image, but when you really hyped on an image, doing these little things will really just take it that next little step. I absolutely love that. And I know when I zoomed in, it looks a little bit noisy, but we do have Lightroom denoiser that we'll do at the end, and that will make it so much cleaner. And this is just another little trick, again, just to draw audience into the face. That's all we want to be doing here, is just drawing them in. Which leads me on to my next mask, which I'm going to do a linear gradient from the bottom. I'm going to drag it all the way up to the middle and then drag it down, just so it is very, very subtle. And I'm going to drop the exposure slightly. I say slightly. I'm going to drop the exposure. The bottom of this image is dead space. So being able to lower that will immediately draw people up into the subject right in the middle, which is exactly what we want. So last one, I'm going to do a background adjustment. I'm going to add in the same thing we did before. I'm going to add the color range in, but now you can see we have the same effect where I want to get just the sky, but we've now included the body because that has the same color range as the background. So I'm just going to add there, and look at that. We now have a clean mask. Just make sure nothing is on the bird. There we go. Awesome. What is this? Cool. All right, so now we have a clean background mask. And I want to make this a little cooler. I mean, not too crazy, not too cool, but just a little bit, just to get that little bit of blue back. And maybe I'm going to drop the highlights a little bit. So we've gone from this very, very bland, foggy, sort of grayscale image almost, and we've added so much back to it. It looks fantastic, but we still have a few things to do. You see, we have all of these distracting little things on the bottom. So we're going to go to the remove tool, and we're going to just use the generative AI, generative remove tool. I find that is very, very good when doing this, especially when you have such a plain background. I don't usually do it all in one, but let's see, just for speed's sake, if this works. We have a few sensor spots. Means I got to clean my camera. But let's remove that and see what happens. I am pretty happy with that. There is just one more thing that we have to do. and that is to denoise it. Now with the AI denoise in Lightroom, do this last, and I would recommend the range between 30 to 50. I tend to go on the lower side, because if you don't do this last, every time you make a new mask, this thing here will come up, and I find it slows you down. So you'll constantly be updating the AI settings, which is really frustrating. And as you can see, this takes a long time, even when this is the final step of my image. But keeping it sort of in the 35 to 50 range will help get rid of all of that noise that is kind of distracting. If you go any more further than that, plus 50, then your image starts to look kind of airbrushed and sort of AI generated, which is what you don't want, because you've captured such a cool photo. You don't want it to look AI and people be like, that's AI. Noise isn't bad, but just getting rid of like some of like the more distracting noise is always a fun tool to use. So we've gone from this image all the way to this. And I just absolutely love this photo. It's so cool. There's just been a few tricks that, again, little and often with editing. And this is an easier shot to kind of edit because it's a plain background and the subject's there, and it gives perfectly to sort of a symmetry composition. But what happens if we go to something like this, where we have the background that little bit more busy and there's a lot more going on in the frame? But we're going to start the same. I'm going to slightly crop in and keep that centered on the beak, because it was just a little bit askew to the right. Now we're on a micro four thirds sensor, the 0-1 Mark II. So we're in a 3:4 aspect ratio. I'm going to keep it in that way. I'm going to drop it down a little bit. I'm going to change the overlay to thirds. Now, if I do thirds on the eye, I'm going to lose the tail. So I'm going to make sure the thirds is on the head. So it's still intentional, and we still have the beak going through the center. I like that. I'm actually going to drop that down even further. Awesome. I'm super happy with that. So on to just doing a basic exposure. And drop the highlights. We get a little bit more detail back in the bird. Raise those shadows a little bit. Let's get a little bit back in the background. A nice little S-curve. Now, as you can see, we've got a little bit, probably a little bit too dramatic. Let's drop that back down. But what you can see here now, a little bit more clearly, is on the right side of the image, we have the sunlight hitting this side of the face of the bird. And I'm definitely going to be leaning into that in the edit. We even got a nice little catch light, rim light almost on the tail, which is really cool to see. So starting off, I'm going to slightly warm this image. Let's see, 5600, is that too much? That's a little too much, so we're going to split the difference and do 5200. There we go. I'm just going to add some saturation slightly off the bat. And again, now you can see even more that warm sunlight hitting the right side of this bird. So already I'd say we're in a pretty cool place, but I think we've got a lot more information to grab from this bird, specifically from the right side of the face. I want to see that whole iris of the bird. I'm actually going to raise the exposure a little bit. There we go. So now that's too bright, but as always, my first mask is a radial gradient on the face. Now, unlike the last one on the Spoonbill, the face is not covered by the body of the bird. So you have to be really careful here and make sure this mask is very precise. So I'm going to drop that down, because it's, for example, say I went pretty big and did it like this over the face of the bird and including some of the background. When we've dropped the exposure, I'm just going to do it for dramatic effect. If you drop it all the way down, you get this weird sort of haloing around the bird. So let's bring that back up. I'm going to just drop it by -40. I'm going to make sure that we are sitting pretty tight on that. I'm going to add the feathering in a little bit so we get more detail back in the face. But there we go. So if we show the difference in the mask there, just that first one, again, it's just that little bit more dramatic, that little bit of something. Oh, this is so fun. So in this one, I've dropped the exposure, kind of drawing you in to the face of the bird, but I'm going to do the same thing another radial gradient, but I'm not going to invert it this time. I'm just going to bump the shadows up and slightly raise the exposure so we get that little bit more of information back in to the face of the bird. But I want more detail, and I know that we can get it, because if I put the exposure all the way here, I know this is pretty crazy, but if you zoom in, look at all that information on the eyes. But we want this to be motivated. So I'm going to bring that down. So I know that the information of the irises are both there, but the sun is only shining down on the right eye. So we're going to get the information back on the right to add sort of a little bit more drama. I'm all about the drama. Now you can either do this with a radial or a object, but I'm going to do a radial here on the eye. I'm going to let it spill out a little bit because I raise the exposure. I'm going to raise the shadows, and that is where we start to see the brown color of the eye. Now, don't worry if it's a little noisy, because we have our friend denoise afterwards that will clear that up. But look at that already. Oh my goodness. So if we, again, take the overlay off, it looks like a completely different bird. Now, upon reflection, the beak from this one here now is a little bit glowy. So I'm going to go into the color palette and get the yellow and bring that down again. And you'll notice that when you bring the yellow down, a lot of the leaves are affected. Now, this will be more evident in the next photo, but to me, leaves are always green. Lightroom always picks them up as yellow. A lot of the color is yellow, which is interesting. But I'm just going to drop that luminance down, just because if we keep it there, the beak's glowing a little bit. I want that back. And look at that. Oh, come on. The last one was a little bit more abstract, but this is a perfect example of using one of these linear gradients to, again, darken the lower side and draw the audience up into the image. So if I just do this, do that, but then maybe if I raise the shadow, no, we don't want to do that. But we still can see the catch light on the tail, but it's just darkened that little bit up. So look at the bottom now. So it kind of, you don't need to look in the bottom. It's just out of focus branches and leaves. So we darken that up, we're straight up into the top so we can see the bird's face, and it's just awesome. Now this next mask, again, I said I was leaning in to that sun. We have the catch light in the eye. We can see the light hitting the bird. So I'm going to draw a huge radial gradient on the side, massive. I'm going to make sure it's feathered to 100. I'm going to slightly raise the exposure. I'm going to bring that actually down. We're talking slightly, 0.16. I'm going to warm it up, and I'm going to take away from the dehaze. Now, you might be thinking I'm adding fake sunlight here, but no, I'm just sort of accenting what the light already was there. Now, you can't do this on every single photo because it'll be crazy, especially if you've got a cloudy scene. All of a sudden, you're adding in a fake sunset. It doesn't work, but in certain images like this, I think it really adds to it. Again, let's take off. I mean, it just looks like a completely different photo. Like this one, the bird's got black eyes, and that could be an edit that you choose to like really deep dive into those like really dark eyes, but I knew we had some color there. And they are looking a little bit noisy, but we will get to that. Now, we've gone from here to here. And then just a final one, we're going to get a subject mask. Put the thing back on the subject mask. I'm going to add, we get all of these feathers in. I'm not going to do the bottom one because I don't think the tail really needs this. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of clarity, a little bit of texture. Do I try? Saturation is a little bit too much. We don't want to go too crazy. A tiny bit of contrast, but just raise those shadows up a little bit. And now, as you can see, we've got a bit of noise in this eye. Let's fix that. So we're going to go down. I'm going to add just general clarity. If I dehaze it a little bit. Oh, come on. This looks so good. So we're going to add some denoise. And again, because we've done this last, it's just the whole workflow is just so much quicker. So I'm going to do 35. And if we zoom in now, look at the eye. If you take it off, you see the noise and it sort of gets rid of the white, but you put it on instantly, it's sharper. Look at the fall off from this lens. The eyes are sharp, but even the back of the bird is lens. We are shooting here, if anyone's interested, on the 150 to 400 f4.5, which is OM's sort of flagship lens, and it is truly one of my favorite lenses. Let's update all of that from here to here, and come on, that looks so good. Oh, I'm super happy with that one. So doing these little strokes here and there rather than doing these big broad strokes really is just the key to editing bird photos and just making them that so much more dramatic. So finally on to our third image, and this is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. This is a Eastern Phoebe sat on a sundial. This was in Vermont. I was on vacation with my family. And you can see here it has a bug in its mouth. Now, that's kind of just a little bit extra. It's a little bit fun, but I just think, what a cute little bird on this. We've got the sundial, which is red, a beautiful green background. So we're going to dive into a bit of color theory here. And the main thing that I do on this image is, I think I've already cropped in a little bit. Yeah, I've cropped in a little bit already. This is the sort of composition that I would like. But I think these sort of elements on the bottom are a little bit distracting. So we're going to get rid of those after the fact. So I'm going to raise the exposure because I know we already started off slightly overexposed to the histogram, but I'm exposing for where I want the face to be, knowing that I'm going to create some masks to drop the exposure later on in the edit. I'm going to drop the highlights down to bring some of that background out. I'm going to keep the shadow, barely raise the shadows, and then drop an S curve. And now that is looking pretty bright. So drop it down a little bit. So as I said before, when we're dealing with leaves and greenery, often in Lightroom, the majority of it will be the yellow slider. Look how much sliding the yellow affects this image. And I don't want the background to be I definitely want it to lean more green, but I don't want it to be luminous. So I'm going to like bright highlights of green. So we're going to drop the luminance a little bit. I'm even going to drop the saturation. I think that's a great starting point to where we want it to be. It just, again, allows us to drop the exposure. And you notice that the dropping the yellow has affected the middle of the bird here. So this is without the color section, but because we have so much greenery around us, we were in a cabin essentially on a river surrounded by trees. There's so much green light hitting this bird. I'm gonna add the clarity and the texture. Dehaze. See, dehaze, we don't want to go anywhere near the dehaze in this image. If anything, I might, we'll keep that for now. So first off, I'm going to zoom in. And again, being really careful with this mask that we don't get any of the background in to avoid that haloing effect. So invert there. Keep it centered on the eye. Drop that down. See, we do have a little bit of halo in there, so we've got to bring that in even more. There we go. So just drop that down, see what that looks like. I might have gone too much. No, I really like how that looks, but we are losing some detail in the bird. Now, I know if I use a subject mask here, Lightroom's going to pick the sundial as well. So we don't want to do that. We want to use an object mask. When they introduced object mask, this was a game changer. Like, I hate using the brush. I'm very lazy and I just don't have the skill to accurately do it with the trackpad. If I'm on an iPad with a pencil, forget about it. But on a trackpad, it is a little bit difficult. So I'm going to raise the shadows to get a little bit back, even the exposure a tiny bit. a little bit back in the face of the bird. I'm going to add some clarity. We're going to add an object mask. Oh, not that one. And zoom in onto the eye. See, we have we don't want to go too crazy with this, but add the light back up. Let's have a look. Nice. And then, let's see. I'm going to select the color range and just go there. Interesting, it's picked the bird up as well. So I'm going to remove the subject. There we go. Because I just want to affect this green bit now. So if I do that, obviously it's crazy, but helping us remove the subject gets rid of all of the sundial and things like that. So drop the highlights down, crop in. I'm not going to crop in because I like this, but this is distracting me a little bit, this sort of blue section. And these things are here. So we're going to go into remove. I'm going to try the AI generative thing because that is not, hopefully this will be nice and clean. So I'm going to subtract that and remove it. See what happens. Nice. It's pretty good. And we need to do the same for this here. The start of the E. And I know that I'm not going to get that last bit, but we'll do that separately. Wow, the A7R5 is so good. You can see that there was a spider's web on here. So we're going to remove that. Remove this guy. So we've gone from here to here, and I like that. But there's one more thing. So I said color theory before. So we have opposite colors here, red and green. So we've adjusted the green, and I'm really happy with sort of where it is. But the red can be more. I mean, if we go too crazy, it starts to look fake. So it's finding that balance. Deep red. Because I don't want the red to take away from the subject, but there we go. Again, just a little update there that will just sort of furthermore draw your attention to the center of the image. I find that when I'm doing a lot of bird photography, I do go for a lot of these center compositions. Not always. And there we have it. So nothing too crazy on that edit there. But I think we've got a really good final result. So there we have 3 very different images that I use. Probably I would say 75% of the same workflow. Even in masking, where a lot of my editing is, I use very similar things throughout my process. And if you can master masking, that is difficult to say, you really can just get the wow factors out of your image. I nearly said to the next level. And it will also help you get results out of images that you thought weren't worth editing. For example, that spoonbill shot, that morning I walked away looking at the back of my camera thinking like absolutely nothing. But when I brought it into Lightroom and was able to just play around with it for a little bit, that is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. Okay, I'm definitely rambling now, so I will wrap this up. But I hope you're able to take something away from this. And if there's something that you do in Lightroom that you absolutely love and think people need to know this specific trick, please let us know down in the comments, because we are all students and teachers at the same time. So your opinion definitely does matter. I would love to see all of those comments down below. But in the meantime, my name is Matt. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.